welcome to our virtual session, to our virtual audience here. You have myself, Ahmed Rammay. I am a marketing generalist, I'll say, or a strategist, and I help small and medium-sized businesses and individuals come up with their go-to-market strategy and their brand vision. And I've been doing this for about 15 years now as myself, and I'm going to be your host today. I'd like to ask Katherine to introduce herself now.
Great, thanks very much. My name is Katherine Sharp. My company's Enliven, and I've been a consultant for 5+ years and in the business environment for 20+. So I'm looking forward to our conversation today. Josh, I'm going to hand it over to you.
My name is Josh Kremer. I'm an e-commerce consultant. I help businesses move online if they haven't been online, or migrate between platforms, various technical things like that. And I've been a consultant for about 8 years.
Fantastic. Well, I'm excited to get the conversation rolling with each of you here. And, you know, as is the way we are in 2020, we're not going to keep it light. We're going to jump right into the heavy hitter questions. So let's start with the first one. How has COVID permanently changed the e-commerce ecosystem? And do you think it will go back to the way it was before COVID? Josh, I'm going to let you take that one on.
That's a good question. I guess the short answer is I don't think it will go back to the way it was before. And I guess there's a couple of reasons. The first reason that comes to mind is just how many, I'll use my own clients as an example. How many of my own clients have had to significantly change what they do in the last 6 to 8 months? And I just assume that is just a little snapshot of the entire industry, that you can't undo those changes. And so those changes might be moving your entire team remote, and now closing all your retail stores, which is the case for one of my clients. You can't undo that. And so if the whole industry is operating that way and making those big changes, I feel like you can't undo them. So that's just the negative side of it. But I think there's a positive side of it too, which is I think society now realizes that there's a resilience to e-commerce, where if things are really bad, like for example, a pandemic happens, but you have a technology way to still do commerce, your business can be saved. So I think it's just also showing the value that e-commerce has, not just a convenience, but even sort of a fail-safe now.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective, especially when you talk about the shift that needs to happen to move to e-commerce. It's more than just flipping a switch. Obviously, there's a whole culture shift, there's a people shift, there's the way we work and the way we do our transactions and all that. There's a lot more that goes into it for sure. Katherine, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I'm going to take another perspective too, and that's kind of like as a consumer or somebody who uses, the e-commerce components of buying things. And I think we're seeing that that's definitely changed. It's needed to, but I don't think there's now that some have made that shift, if they haven't already, I think it's gonna probably, consumers now are expecting it to probably stay the same. And so, they've become used to it now that they've also maybe made those switches. So, just personally, I was shopping online prior to this to get my groceries, and I've continued that, and I'll continue, past all of the COVID.
Yeah, it's interesting. Groceries are a good example that the grocery business has benefited hugely from COVID, just by force. People just would much prefer to not have to go into a crowded grocery store to shop. But the other side of the food industry, the restaurant business, has obviously been just decimated. And I keep reading different numbers, but the numbers I keep reading are somewhere around 30 to 50% of restaurants are likely to close in the next few months. This is a Canadian statistic, and the article I read basically says the restaurants were holding on throughout the summer, partly maybe savings, maybe really loyal customers, the patio season where you could still, try to make delivery work, but COVID's just not ending. And so if it runs long enough, businesses are just going to decide, restaurant businesses are just going to decide it's not feasible for them to stay open. And so I have no idea what's going to happen when all those restaurants close. People still need to eat. So what's that going to do for the e-commerce world online for food? I don't know.
It's interesting you bring up restaurants because Earl's, I wouldn't say completely changed the business model, but they adapted their business model. And so I felt like it was a very good example of businesses and how they're adapting to this new norm, where you're saying we have less bums and seats in the restaurant.
Yeah.
They added a grocery component to their service line, and it became something that you could order online and buy. And it wasn't related directly to their restaurant business in the sense of you order the pre-made meal or what have you. They were actually selling groceries. And if you think about it, who's better positioned to do that than a large restaurant like that has access to suppliers, access to vendors, access to a supply chain, access to all these things. Yeah. And open that up to their customer base to say, hey, if you're in a pinch and you need something, why not order it through us? Now, I don't know how successful it was or, if they'll continue it. But when I was there the other day, they still had all those items listed and down to, and you'll laugh because I asked about it, but down to the soap they use in the bathroom. You can buy that online. It's a Fruits and Passions product, and you can buy it right from Earl's, because I made a joke saying, can I buy your soap? I had a good scent to it. And anyway, so seeing that transformation and the way these companies are evolving has been hugely motivational. Actually, I would say inspirational to see how these companies are moving forward.
Yeah. And the other thing that comes to mind, and I just don't know how significant it is, but just in my own mind personally, now that I've experienced a pandemic, it's just kind of like this option in my mind now where what's to say this doesn't happen in 5 years? Like, assuming that COVID eventually calms down and life goes back to normal. But even if it does, just the fact that social distancing just seems to be a very important technique for solving a problem like this. We all may need to be distanced again. So do we just need to plan for that? And I don't know if public health is going to recommend that again, but it's just in my own mind, it's just like, maybe that resiliency, maybe we need to plan for that down the road again.
It's interesting you say that, because the social distancing element of it, both from a business perspective and a social construct perspective, in North America, it's a very big principle here to have a social bubble. And, you don't enter someone's social bubble if you don't know them, but in other cultures and other communities around the world, there is no construct of a social bubble. You are right in there, and it's acceptable. And, so I wonder if that, because it has become a global thing for the social distance as a good measure against COVID, and that's what we're talking about, but does that become a regular part of everyday notion for other cultures, for other communities, other places and parts around the world? And, we're seeing how much e-commerce enables that social distance to happen, because you're right, and you don't have to go to a grocery store anymore. I used Instacart the other day, and it was fantastic. I got an hour and a half back to my day. I didn't have to go anywhere. I paid a bit of a premium for it, but at least I didn't have to take productive time out of my day to do that. Though I will say I miss the tangible going to the grocery store. I do.
I miss leaving my house.
Well, I think this touches on that point about will things go back. I mean, the other part of this is that businesses have also made the decision to have people working from home now, like not, like for unforeseen future, like they just said you can work from home now. And I think that may change continue to have that impact on the e-commerce side as well. Because now you've got people, just like you said, Ahmed, working from home, right? So to now go out or take time out of your day to do something when, is there an e-commerce related solution, if you will, to the things you would maybe do while you were out and about or at the office or things like that, right?
Yeah.
So.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And cloud has really, brought that to the light in terms of work from anywhere, really. As long as you have an internet connection, for most things, you can work from anywhere. When we're looking at that transition, though, and that move from traditional business practice, or what your traditional business model might have been, perhaps you had a roadmap towards digital transformation, or perhaps towards a cloud or something like this. But perhaps in your business's mind's eye, it was a 6-year or someday plan. But now we're looking at, this is perhaps now a 6 month or less or now plan in order to survive. As you're saying, restaurants, for example, some restaurants have a very short lifespan now to look ahead to. And how do they do that? So I was hoping maybe one of you can comment on what that plan might look like and how it's been truncated and how that changes things.
Yeah, that's in my personal experience, that's what I'm dealing with as a e-commerce consultant is, you know, a lot of the engagements I'm involved in are typically a long-term project. Many of my clients are manufacturers of products that have been around selling wholesale for many years, and retail has been through physical retailers, and they have a plan to sell online directly, but there's integration with their systems. There's a way to make sure that that works out for their, you know, in at least to be intentional about how they compete with their existing physical retailers and all these things. So it's typically this long-term plan. But in the last 6 months, I'm having the conversations of, okay, like you say, this needs to be a 6-month plan, or in one case, a 2-week plan. Like all my retail stores are closed, just nobody's going. So I have all this inventory. What am I going to do? You know, I have summer inventory, summer apparel. What do I do? And so I think the first thing that probably goes without saying is the expectation for what's a good enough e-commerce website is just lower now. I mean, put bluntly, I just think, you know, good enough, get it done. We have to have something online.
Yeah.
Adding to that too, for creating that e-commerce store, Shopify, for example, is making it super easy now to create these e-commerce stores. And, you know, it's not just about building a website anymore, which was, you know, marketing in the 90s and the 2000s is, I need a website. Now you're looking at more, I need an e-commerce store, which goes beyond having that website. And what's beautiful is through the cloud and some of these on-demand service options that are out there, you don't have to be a programmer. You don't have to be, you know, hiring out to a big expensive agency to get some of this stuff done. There's templates. There's, you know, the backbone is already there. And again, companies like Shopify that happen, making it easy. And so you're right to that standard of how good does your e-commerce store need to be? You don't even need to worry about that in some cases anymore because the infrastructure exists. It's out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you've got like also like, so Josh had your examples, right, from a sort of more manufacturing wholesale. You've got people who also had businesses that were built on like on site, and now they're having, you know, to move whatever they may have been presenting or sharing or, you know, teaching on site now has to move online. So if there was already maybe a certain percentage of it that was there, now it's like not an option to not, you know, you've got to do something if you're going to keep in business. So you're seeing those have to go from plans that could have been any number of years. Yes, we'd like to continue to grow here, to like, we have to grow there now. We need to go there now, right? So, yeah.
And it's interesting because there's the technology side of the plan, just sort of like, oh, quickly, I need something, like Ahmed mentioned, you know, what tools are there? Can I just get something out there now? That's absolutely necessary. But the other side of it is all those real tricky business problems to sort out that did legitimately make it a 6-month to, you know, sorry, a 6-year plan. All those problems are still there. So how do you work with a company to still solve those problems, but somehow chunk it into pieces? You know that now we're getting into Katherine territory there.
Well, just logistics alone, right? You have a store, sure, fine. I've purchased a product. How do I get it out the door? I'm not Amazon. I don't have drones of my own to be flying packages around, for example. How are we going to do that? And those are, you're right, some of those very real problems that businesses are faced with and still needing to challenge or deal with those challenges in a short order.
Yeah, train up your staff or whoever that is that has to also, you know, be interacting that or be using it. So they've gone, you know, the example I was using is sort of on-site presence to now having the skills and the ability to do something online, right? So, you know, product that they've sold, now they've got to be able to represent and share that from an online perspective.
Yeah, for sure. And what the other side of that comes to me is still sort of unaddressed is the relationship side, the human interaction side. You know, I think of, for example, for you, Katherine, you were saying, you know, people coming into a store to buy something and that transaction, but what about mortgage providers, for argument's sake, where that was a very in-touch, intimate, up-close interaction that is now sort of moving online. Documentation is online, signing is online. You could be meeting your mortgage broker for the first time online. And how do you capture that relationship side of it offline, or sorry, online, and how do you capture and make up for the offline components of it? That's something that e-commerce hasn't really solved for yet.
No, no, and I don't think it. And it's funny because I really believe that e-commerce needs to be an option, but not replacing physical retail. I'm using retail as an example, but in-person connection, because I have not personally found any alternative to the value of physically holding something in a store, talking to somebody. So I see them both being useful. And right now, though, if you literally only have one option, then that's an interesting question. Like, how can you improve e-commerce enough to at least get more of that personal, the value of a personal connection? If we just can't do that, how can we improve the tools and the processes that e-commerce has? And I wonder if we're going to start seeing a bunch of improvements to the e-commerce technology landscape just through force. We need to do that somehow. I don't know what that would look like, but better Zoom calls maybe. I don't know.
AI will probably become a big part of that, and graphical interfaces. I think, I've seen some videos recently where it was literally a robot to look like a real person, and they were speaking on the video to the person, but it was not an actual person. But if you wouldn't know that unless you look really closely enough at how it was animated, and such.
Yeah.
The whole world has kind of gone much further too. What about geography? Does that change an e-commerce strategy and or business model? I think of rural, for example, or a city dweller. We talked about shipping earlier. We still have to find solutions for that challenge, but how does that change the world and the dynamic?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, go ahead, Catherine.
Yeah, well, I just picked up an article here out of a local business magazine. And here, let me read you this. And it ties back to this conversation about the food part, right? It says, it's now normal to let a stranger pick your food. If you live in a city of more than 200,000 inhabitants in Canada, it also is very reasonable to expect your online order to be delivered within 2 hours with little or no substitutions. That's the new benchmark. So that's like a statement regarding, the city dweller. But, I live more rural. Now I'm getting my food delivered, but there's other considerations now, right, that have to be taken into play because of the being more rural than in a city, right? Just the fact of where you're delivering it, how you're delivering it, the timing, all those things.
And it's interesting because our ability for the human side of e-commerce to be remote, like the worker side, is just better and better and better. I mean, as long as you have a decent internet connection, you can do a lot, operate a lot of e-commerce businesses from a rural area. That's changed. What hasn't changed is, like you say, the actual delivery and distribution and fulfillment. If you are in a small town, if you're in small town BC right now and you want to ship a product, you are at a huge disadvantage. The cost to ship it is higher. You're not going to have the materials. You're not going to have the best prices on boxes. It's a lot of those problems that are just very real. So, you're still relying on the major centers to do a lot of the fulfillment for you. So, that's a good question of how geography is going to change that. You may want to start a new e-commerce business, like a lot of us imagine doing, in a small town and get the benefit of low rent, but you're kind of trading that off with fewer partners to work with.
Yeah, geography will either bring us closer together through the shift towards e-commerce and all that, or it's really going to create a divide. And that divide will be based on geography. What conveniences are you able to have in a larger city center versus what you give up, like you said, by living in a smaller community, or if you live on a farm in rural Alberta, for example. You're not going to get that grocery within 2 hours. You know what I mean? And the retailers probably can't fulfill it. It's sort of a comment to a human psyche as well, and this need for immediacy, and how much further e-commerce is taking that. We expect one-day delivery, for example, now with Amazon Prime, and we're upset if we don't get it. Whereas before, can you imagine when they first opened, it was, I'm going to get this in 3 to 4 business days. Awesome. And now, no, I need an hour. And then Instacart, for example, is taking that even further. You can expect groceries within 2 hours. You know, like if I had a dinner tonight that I did not plan for, I can now get groceries within 2 hours. It's no longer order a week or two in advance and have it all pre-planned out. I can be very spontaneous.
Yeah. And I just wonder what that'll do for massive grocery stores, because, you know, when you walk into like an extreme example, like a movie theater, I can't imagine there are that many people still going to a movie theater, regardless of whether we're technically allowed to or not, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And what's going to do there, but in grocery, you know, with like something the size of a superstore in Canada, they do click and collect, which is the only thing I'm doing these days. I order online and then I go and wait in a stall. I text them. They come out to the stall that I tell them I'm in. They put the groceries in my car. It's done. And that's the only way I shop now. And I have to assume that's fairly common. So I wonder, like, at some point, are grocery stores already looking at the rent cost and saying, I could just half the cost of my store and double the cost of my distribution center? Is that a calculation that everyone's doing?
Right. I think the other part, though, is just, you know, you kind of touched on it, Ahmed, was the availability of certain things, right? There's still the, you know, if you do still have some type of a brick and mortar presence in a city, right? People can still do what they've done, which is go and check things out. Back to your thing, Josh, about not fully being able to do that sort of touch and feel well. So people might still have that. You don't have that in rural. You're buying things sight unseen, right?
Yes.
You're buying product online that way. And that's, I think, where that whole distribution part, you know, the whole return process, all that kind of stuff comes into play, and you're buying things unseen.
Yeah. Well, my gut tells me that the e-commerce industry, the providers, the vendors, are going to just make massive gains in the next year, because we have to. We're just, in my industry, we have to make those changes. And, you know, Shopify showed up years ago and changed the e-commerce industry. They didn't take all the business. They just took a piece of the business that was ripe for the taking. And I feel like there's room for other businesses like Shopify, not necessarily on the platform side, but if we need to be able to pay people, pay strangers securely, quickly for a food transaction, maybe there's going to be new platforms specifically for restaurant delivery that aren't the delivery services we're using. Who knows? But I feel like that's going to happen because just the amount of need for it right now, I feel like the tooling is about to really ramp up.
The acceleration is there for sure, and the power is behind it, which is kind of an interesting jumping point to my next question. And I wanted to know about the decision to create your e-commerce store. So obviously there's a lot to consider and all that, but one element of it is where and what platforms, as you said. So the question is the decision to create your own e-commerce store using, is the decision to create your own e-commerce store or use Amazon or to use another platform? And how will those platforms be impacted?
Yeah, that's often an exercise that I go through with the client. And, you know, before COVID, it would have been, you know, the basics of, I like to work back from what is the best case scenario for you delivering this product? Delivering as in whatever that looks like, fulfilling it to a customer. And if the best experience is that somebody in your company do it, and you'd like to do that and you think the experience is better, let's go there first, because I personally always like the control of the customer experience. If you can do all of the pieces together, I prefer that personally. That's partly taste. It's also part of the e-commerce business I ran for years. I think you can you can control more of the customer experience. Having said that, there's always the option of using Amazon or another fulfillment company that takes that very difficult problem off of your hands. You lose the control, but you gain the incredible convenience. So typically we make that decision by looking at the price of fulfillment. It's often more expensive than you imagine. I think it seems to me that people often think it's both convenient and less expensive than fulfilling yourself, and that's often not the case, at least for at least while you're starting. You usually need big volumes to make that make sense. But now that we're into COVID territory, where the whole fulfillment world is just booming right now, I wonder if we're going to see, and I haven't seen it yet, but I'm wondering if we're going to see it soon, another tier. As in, fulfillment companies are just saying like, yeah, we have a $500 a month option instead of a $5,000 a month option. I'm just pulling those numbers out of thin air. But the idea that we may see a new rung for all the smaller businesses that need it. And that's what I'm hoping happens, honestly. We get more options there. And one more thing on that, Shopify did make a huge investment before COVID. I want to say it was, I don't know, 8 months ago. It's a guess. Shopify has been investing huge into their own fulfillment centers. And so that Shopify vendors who aren't selling on Amazon, sort of intentionally, like they want to kind of control their customer experience, they can now use Shopify's fulfillment center and still have a more of a seamless non-Amazon offering. And so that was already happening, and I just haven't seen it kind of roll out into the market in Canada, but I'm waiting for that because I think it's very much needed.
Are you seeing these vendors starting to come up with more solutions around some of these challenges you've outlined, or is it still yet to be seen?
During COVID, I haven't seen anything sort of new. I mean, I've seen the progression of things that I sort of expected, but in terms of like something totally new that is an obvious response to the need that the pandemic caused, I haven't seen anything. But for whatever reason, maybe it's just me being an optimist. I imagine it's coming, and it's coming soon.
Are there downsides, do you think, to using, like you said, the personal touch and that kind of thing, but are there downsides to using an Amazon or other e-commerce platforms like that? And I don't mean just in comparison to creating your own in terms of personal touch and those things, but in terms of either like high costs, or is it the environment in which they operate? Like, what are those downsides that people may not be aware of?
Yeah, fulfilling with any sort of third-party fulfillment company, typically the part that'll make you uneasy right away is you just have to have your system, your processes, just the way you operate, really nailed down enough that you can say, okay, I'm going to put a pallet of something, and it has to be pre-built, made, packaged, labeled. I'm going to give a pallet to somebody, and then, which means you have to be able to produce in those quantities. Maybe you used to sort of do it just in time, or you used to do 100 at a time. Now you have to have 1,000 because that's their minimum quantity. Now you have to build in bigger quantities, but also if you have anything that doesn't follow the rules, I'm using Amazon specifically here, but like, let's say that you didn't package and label your stuff correctly, there's now just a cost to change every single item to fix it, or they might just ship it back to you, or they might just refuse it. And those are all reasonable things to deal with. It's just, you used to be able to just kind of like go to the warehouse and solve that. And now you have to really be organized and planned ahead. And a lot of businesses, they're just not ready for that. E-commerce is something that they're just jumping into. They're not ready to like plan a year of their e-commerce fulfillment out into production schedules like that.
Well, I think you're
Katherine,
getting.
where do you see that happening in your space?
Well, I think it's a slightly different thing, because the stuff that Josh is talking about is when you have that physical product and you've got that fulfillment need, because there's another component of e-commerce that doesn't really include that, right? Where you are doing that stuff based on the platforms that you're using, and you're fulfilling because you're able to, like, I'm able to go purchase this, knowledge item, if you will, and I'm getting it right away, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a different thing where you're able to manage that. What Josh is talking about, that involves so much other, like you take a look now with all of the stuff that's being invested in robotics and things like that, to do exactly what Josh is talking about, is to do that fulfillment piece. So that's what you're, in a sense, paying the cost for when you're that kind of e-commerce company, right? But there's a whole nother that doesn't require that. So that's what I'm seeing, is that you'll have to build out or continue to build out that strength in your own company, focus on your core stuff, but be able to fulfill very instantaneously, if you will, online, right?
For sure. And you're totally right. The physical product in a box that you ship to somebody, which is what comes to mind when a lot of us think of e-commerce, in a way, maybe that's the biggest thing that's changed since COVID in this world, is that's just one thing. It was always e-commerce. That will continue. That will change maybe some, but think about use the mortgage broker or a realtor or university or, coaching. Just list any kind of thing that you used to do in person and you used to spend a lot of money doing it. There were whole industries set up there to operate in person, and we need to deliver that product, so to speak, online. That could be a very big change.
Mm-hmm.
I think the question that's on everyone's mind, not just because of COVID, but as we go through this and as the industry evolves and transforms and we as a society transform in how we operate, how we purchase, how we do these transactions. The question really is e-commerce that silver bullet for businesses?
That's a good question. I'll let you go first, Catherine.
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is no, I don't think it's the silver bullet. I think more we'll have to consider that, but I think you've also got other types of things going on. And you talked about it early, Ahmed, which is that personal connection, or that, even that sense of community, where there's the support of your local, businesses, for example, where you still may be able to have that interaction. Or they'll have some form of e-commerce, but you'll still be connected to your community. So I don't think that e-commerce is the only part of that. So that's why I don't think it's a silver bullet. There's so much more around it.
Yeah, it's funny, selling, if you don't have a great product and you don't have a great story about that product and you don't communicate it well, it doesn't matter whether you're selling it online or in a store or anywhere else. I mean, really, the best e-commerce companies are just the best companies that sell good products for a good price with a good story behind them. And so I think, the fundamentals matter a lot more than the platform. I just think the platform is going to change a lot right now, and we'll have to see how well companies are going to weather this storm, with the good foundation that they have, but being forced to have to kind of trek out into this new territory.
Yeah, and some will have the benefit of basically starting from like an e-commerce or a digital first type of company, right?
Mm.
Where that's how they've built their models are designed that way. They'll be fulfilling, however that looks. That there'll be those companies, either they're here now or they're going to start like that or pivot and be that. But then you've got the ones that's not they're not a digital first company, and that transformation, I think, is the big part of what's going on now, and it's been accelerated with COVID.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's, picking up on what you just said there, Catherine, it's really great that we have an accelerated e-commerce action plan to help businesses that are thinking about moving into this new world of e-commerce, and as they're on their own business journey to provide a different service to their customers and clients. We have a really great resource at the end of this meeting or this call here to provide to our viewers, to share with them some of our learnings and some of the things that they need to consider when they're thinking of moving on this journey towards e-commerce. Because for some it may be a silver bullet, and for others it may be one of the tools in their toolkit.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Well, I think this is a good point to pause, and I just want to say thank you to Catherine and Josh for being on the call with us here today and being able to provide their insights.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you both.